welcome back to my video series examining Missing 411, Eastern United States. If you remember from 5 months ago when the last video was, we are currently in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountain chapter, which is, as I stated then, actually quite lengthy, and so I had split it into 2 parts. I had both parts recorded, however, due to an unfortunate sound issue, the second part was corrupted beyond what was feasible to publish, even by my standards. That said, I had intended to immediately re-record and upload, however, due to life circumstances and just thinking that, you know what, enough is enough, I took a temporary hiatus from the whole Missing 411 thing. But now I'm back, and without further ado, let's jump into the Great Smoky Mountains Part 2. We had left off before covering Brad Lavies. Brad, who was 13 years old at the time, went missing on March 28, 1993, from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Brad was on a day hike with family and friends going toward Rainbow Falls. This next part bears reading directly from the book for how vague it is. Quote, "Sometime in the late afternoon, while walking up to the waterfall, Brad became lost and separated from his family and friends." Close quote. When his parents noticed that he had gone missing, they went back down the mountain and reported him as such. His disappearance was strange because the trail is clearly marked. The search was focused in a half-mile wide, 2.5-mile long area with the assistance of helicopters with infrared. 6 days after he went missing, Brad's body was found at the base of an unnamed waterfall about half a mile off the trail. The area he was in was very difficult to reach, and the park officials stated that he had died of head trauma, probably from a fall. His body was left where it was found for a while, indicating that the National Park Service found it suspicious. Lavies makes this claim, quote, "In an unattended death, someone dies not under the care of a physician, an autopsy is automatically conducted to ensure that there is no foul play." Close quote. Lavies goes on to accuse the National Park Service of being complicit in a conspiracy to stop autopsies from revealing the true cause of deaths of people found in parks. Let's review. The first 2 points are correct. For the third point, however, it is noted that Brad darted ahead of his parents, quote, "taking shortcuts along the 2.7 miles trail," close quote, and that pretty much explains how he could have gotten lost. The trail may have been clearly marked, but it really doesn't matter if he wasn't on the trail. He was actively choosing to go off the trail. As for the fifth point, footprints believed to be Brad's were found off the trail, which again would make sense. The sixth point is correct initially, but then the search pattern was broadened out because that's how searches work, and I'm surprised that Lavies doesn't know that by now. As for the seventh point, it's correct. Eighth point is correct, especially considering that everywhere off of that particular trail would be considered hard to reach. Ninth point is correct, and then we run into significant problems. Park officials said that the body's recovery would be very dangerous, so they had to plan it carefully. As such, it took them a while to retrieve the body due to the meticulous planning involved. They didn't want more people getting hurt trying to retrieve the body. As for the autopsy thing, an autopsy is performed when someone not under the care of a physician dies when the cause of death could pose a risk to public safety, such as a death by disease or tainted food. Otherwise, an autopsy is only conducted when foul play is suspected or when the next of kin asks for one to be performed. And the last point is wrong as well, or at this point it's conjecture on my part as well as his. But if there was such wrongdoing, then they had the parents completely fooled. The parents stayed in contact with the park rangers who searched for their son and later donated more than $10,000 to the park service to help pay for better search gear. Let's move on. Eloise, Lindsay. Pilates says that this is one of the strangest stories in the whole book, so buckle up. In fact, you may have heard this one already from another source. Eloise, who was 22 years old at the time, went missing on November 4th, 1989, from Table Rock State Park, South Carolina. She planned to take a 43-mile hike down the Appalachian Trail. She would be alone for a week of hiking, then she would join a friend. 3 days into her hike, she was followed by men that she knew meant her harm. After several days of being chased, she ditched her backpack and supplies, then left the trail in a desperate attempt to lose the men. She was only partially successful, though. While she no longer saw the men, she could occasionally hear them. When she missed the meetup with her friend, law enforcement was called. For the next 9 days, Eloise was in fear of being caught by the men chasing her. Many nights, she didn't sleep at all, and she did everything she could to avoid them. 16 days after she was declared missing, a hunter found Eloise 5 miles off of the trail and deep in the woods. She gave police a complete statement in which she explained that she was chased non-stop until she was found by the hunter. Lavies alludes to both Bigfoot and the wild men that he referenced in the Dennis Martin case. Let's review. I couldn't find anything that indicated that she was meeting up with a friend to continue the hike. As far as I could see, she was just making the hike alone, and the whole thing was supposed to last a week. It was, I believe, her parents who called in the fact that she was missing after she failed to check in after that first week. It was 3 or 4 days into the hike, I saw both, but to clarify, she never saw the men, but she heard them talk about her. For point 5, tying into what I was saying before, she stated that she never saw the men to begin with, and that she only heard them talking to each other and on walkie-talkies making vague, sort of threatening statements about her. For point 6, again, it was her family who reported her missing after that week when she didn't return. The next 2 points, as far as Eloise is concerned, are correct. And then we get to point 9. And you know what? The whole Wildman theory might make sense given the information provided in the book. However, when you look at the statements that were made to the newspapers at the time, you get sort of a different idea. Eloise stated that the men looking for her had dogs, monitors for tracking down live animals, like some sort of tracking device, whistles, guns, tractors, cars, mopeds, and boats. Of course, she didn't say how she knew that they had all these things, considering that she never saw them. And she also stated that the first men who frightened her off the trail had walkie-talkies, and that's what scared her off, is them talking on these walkie-talkies. I don't think that Bigfoot or wild men have access to this sort of technology. Eloise also pointed out several times that she was afraid even on the first days of her hike before she supposedly encountered these men. She had serious misgivings about taking the hike alone, which honestly is probably a wise thing. She probably should not have done this by herself. And law enforcement surmised that even if she really did hear men talking about her, that it was innocuous and she was just being paranoid. The times that she heard helicopters and people tracking her in the woods were, in fact, the searchers trying to rescue her. But she was fleeing from them, thinking that they were these men who were trying to do bad things. It even took some convincing on the part of the hunter who did find her that he wasn't out to hurt her. We reach opinion territory now, but I think that given the evidence, we can surmise that we have a case of a paranoid episode where 3 days of being afraid culminated in this sort of frenzied run into the woods. Next up is Evangeline Lorimer. Evangeline, who was 21 years old at the time, went missing on June 8, 1951, from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. She was on vacation in the park with her father at the time. She went on a hike without her dad, and when she did not return, he reported her missing. Heavy rainstorms hit the area. Canines could not track her down. Days into the search, her coat was found hanging from a tree about 5 miles from where she went missing. 13 days into the search, Evangeline was found alive, walking down a trail alone. She had swollen ankles and insect bites, but otherwise was in relatively good condition. She reported that she had drank water from brooks and ate huckleberries. She was dazed and confused. Lavies notes that this is a recurring theme in missing persons cases. Let's review. Now, the first half of this is all correct. But when we start talking about after she was found, we run into some more issues. As for her being in quote-unquote relatively good condition, this is only true if you consider being nearly unable to walk and losing 18 pounds over the course of 2 weeks as being in relatively good condition. According to the reports that I read, she said that she didn't eat anything at all, and she had previously gone a week without food for fun. She had also told searchers that it was time to come out since she had to work on the next Monday, as if she had gone missing on purpose. And I have to mention the last point. So, Lavies means to point out that being lost, exposed to the elements for days, eating only berries or nothing at all, and drinking possibly tainted water makes people disoriented and confused. It's not mysterious, that's just what happens. Of course, it's a recurring theme in missing persons cases. Why this case is even included in a book about unexplained disappearances, I don't know. In the book, Lavies does not ever note why she went missing, which does indeed make it appear unexplained as far as the book is concerned, but it seems like she took a wrong turn while hiking and got lost. But she was unconcerned with being out in the elements for over a week. Most papers said that she was only half lost since she came out of the woods saying that it was time to come out. Honestly, I think that fact makes things even stranger, so I'm not sure why Lavies leaves this information out. Let's move on. Thelma Polly Melton. Polly, who was 58 years old at the time, went missing on September 25th, 1981, from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Polly and her husband frequented this area in summer, camping in a trailer with other couples. Polly went on a hike with 2 other women. She said that she was thirsty but didn't want to leave the trail. So she pushed on until the turnaround point, then started walking ahead of the group. She was only about 75 yards ahead of them when the other 2 women crested a hill and saw that Polly had vanished. When the other 2 women got back and realized that Polly hadn't made it back before them, they reported her missing. On October 2nd, the supervisor in charge of the search stated that she was no longer in the park because the dogs would have found her if she was. Lavies also says that this is a bold statement considering the track record of dogs in the other cases cited in this chapter. No trace of Polly was ever found. Let's review. First 3 points are correct as far as I can see. It is noted that while she was in front of them, they weren't sure how far ahead, but they were concerned when they went around a bend and didn't see her. You have a rare circumstance where I agree with Pilates that saying that she's no longer in the park because the dogs couldn't find her was probably a very rash thing to say. While dogs are more successful more often than Pilates would like to believe, they aren't 100% by any means. I don't think anybody would make that argument. So we have another case which appears to actually be correctly reported. To add to this and propose a theory, there was some additional info on the Charlie project. She appears to have taken a bottle of Valium with her, and she suffered occasional bouts of depression. She was grieving the loss of her mother earlier that same year, and her minister alleges that she was having an affair with an unknown man. She had also made a call a day prior to her going missing, but to whom and what about is unknown. We can kind of connect the dots there about what may or may not have happened and what may or may not have happened intentionally. Next is Abraham Lincoln Ramsay. Abraham, who was 3 years old at the time, went missing on March 11th, 1919 from Dunn Creek, Tennessee. Pilates notes that his 3 sources are 2 books and a single article from the Atlanta Constitution, dated March 20th, 1919. Abraham had been following his sisters to a country store when he decided to turn back, but he didn't make it home. His footprints, when they found them, ended abruptly, which mystified everyone. The books disagree with this account, instead saying that the family dog had taken off and could be heard barking some distance away, and Abe went out to get him. Then later, the dog was found under the house and had been in a fight. Let's review. I was able to locate 14 news articles about Abraham. So let's see if we can get more information than the 2 books and 1 article than what is cited by Pilates. The articles I was able to find allege that Abraham had followed his sisters on the road out to the store. His sisters, noticing this part of the way there, told him to go home, and he went back, but he took a wrong turn and ended up on an unused mountain path. His trail led 5 miles before it was lost. Within the context of the entire article, it appears as though the abrupt ending of the trail had just mystified searchers about where he had gone, but they didn't think that he had been abducted or anything like that. Further, on or about the 27th of March, Abraham's body was found inside of a hollow log. It was supposed that he had crawled in there for shelter, then died from either exhaustion or hunger. Nowadays, we would call that exposure. Considering the time of year and the location, it's not hard to believe. I think it's clear from this case that Pilates is not the only author who was guilty of subpar research. I would love to see the sources of these books since they are so radically different from every newspaper of the time. Michael Eugene Reel. Michael, who was 8 years old at the time, disappeared on July 2nd, 1983 from Rowan State Park, Tennessee. Michael was at a campsite with his mother and sister at the time when he went to retrieve water for the site, taking a bucket and walking up the road. But after he didn't return, his mother called for help. His mother thought that he had been kidnapped, but the sheriff said that he wasn't, and the National Park Service said that there was something fishy going on. Exactly 1 week to the hour after he had gone missing, he was found alive and well 2.5 miles away in a blackberry bush. Michael relayed the incredible stories of when he was missing, saying that he stayed in a cabin and watched TV with his grandfather, who was already deceased at the time. Pilates notes that these could not possibly have been hallucinations, since he was otherwise healthy. Instead, he says that this case is linked to Larry Davenport, who disappeared from the same park just 15 days later. let's review. It's always on these really strange ones when a newspaper reports some additional context that just blows it wide open for me. You'll see what I mean here in a second. Everything is correct until the end, like you may have guessed. Before he was found on the 9th, he was spotted on the 3rd by tourists who beckoned to him. He, quote, fled back into the woods, making strange noises, close quote. It sounds like even just one day into his disappearance, he had already lost it. I think it's more plausible that these were just hallucinations or wild imagination. Or at least, that's much more plausible than any alternatives. Further, while it is true that at first he said that he stayed at a cabin, a few hours later he said that he curled up under trees at night and foraged for food. Other articles made it clear that he was saying weird things initially, but was more lucid by the time he was examined by doctors and was able to recount what had actually happened. So yeah, this is weird, but if you actually read the reports at the time, especially given that Michael recanted his initial report of the cabin and instead said that he was sleeping under trees and eating apples and berries, there's really no connection besides time and location. They're very different cases, as you'll see. Larry Davenport. Larry, who was 20 years old at the time, went missing on July 17th, 1983 from Rowan Mountain State Park, North Carolina. He was camping with friends on the western peak. He was sitting at a table when he wordlessly got up and left. When he didn't return, he was reported missing. 3 days into the search, Larry was found 8 miles away by an abandoned home. He was alive, but naked except for a curtain draped around his shoulders. He had scratches covering his entire body. He was incoherent, making statements that made no sense, but he did say that he got the curtains from the abandoned home. He was treated at the hospital for, quote, acute brain syndrome, close quote. Lavies also says that there has to be a connection to Michael's case. As you can probably see already, though, this case is not that similar to the last one. Larry, from the information given, sounds like he had some sort of mental break, whereas Michael was just confused and he recovered in a few hours. But let's review and see what we can find out. The first 3 points are correct as far as I can see. The third one, however, seems to me like it was 2 days, not 3, but there are 2 different reports on his condition, ironically both from the same author. On the 20th, he was reported to have only his jeans on. On the 22nd, he was reported, again by the same author, to only have his underwear and the curtain on. Both articles agree that the home that he was found by was not abandoned, so the curtain was likely given to him by the resident if he was in fact wearing one. The encounter was documented on the 20th, where the resident came out and asked him if he was the missing boy, to which Larry replied, yes. In the reports I read, the acute brain syndrome was clarified to just be confusion. And there is a final point, which I've had to add on here, that explains his confusion perfectly. He had hallucinations from mushrooms that he ate, a well-documented detail that Lavies leaves out. The last case in this chapter is that of J. Charles Toney. Jay, who was 17 years old at the time, went missing on May 25th, 1982 from Clingman's Dome, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Jay and his friends went to the park after attending the World's Fair in Knoxville. Clingman's Dome is the highest point in the park at an elevation of 6,643 feet. On the way back down, Jay said that he was going to take a shortcut through the woods and would meet the rest of the group by the car. He never arrived. A search was launched immediately because he was a diabetic. On the second day of the search, Jay was found 8 miles from where he went missing, laying on the ground near a creek. He was unconscious, but alive. To his credit, Lavies admits that he was found via search dogs. Jay only had on one shoe and a tank top. When shaken, he weakly stated, "I want out of the Smokies." He was transferred to intensive care and he survived. What happened to his clothes was never disclosed, nor were they ever found. The key point that Pilates highlights in this case, and presumably the reason for its inclusion into the Missing 411 book, is the fact that his missing clothing was never found and it was never explained, as well as the 8-mile distance from where he was last seen. It is precisely these 2 points that are incorrect. The only clothing he was missing was one shoe, which was within the line of sight of Jay. His clothing was soaked, so searchers removed it and gave him their own clothes since he was suffering from severe hypothermia. And he was less than half the distance that was claimed in Missing 411. Besides, even if it had been 8 miles, which it wasn't, would that really have been so unusual for a teenager? So in summary, if we look at the review, it was around 3.5 miles. He was only missing one shoe. He had his other clothes and were in fact removed by the searchers who found him because he was soaked. Well, if you've made it to the end, thank you. I won't keep you much longer. The chapter conclusions listed in the book are the usual wild conspiracies about days and times that people go missing. I'd argue that there really isn't much correlation, just coincidence in a few instances. So far, 86 of the 109 cases that we have examined in this series have been found to be misreported or misrepresented in some way. Of the 23 remaining, only a handful of these are unsolved cases of missing persons who were never found. It's frankly astounding. Even if every case moving forward were to be completely accurate to reality, I would still personally be unable to trust anything that Pilates reports, or at least without doing my own research first. And that's the whole point of the series. A plea for people to please do your own research. Don't just trust what you read or what you see in a video. Check out the sources that I've listed. Make sure that I'm telling the truth. It's all there in the description below. I hope that I have been able to expose Missing 411, or at the very least, the Eastern United States version of the book, for what it is. A poorly written, badly researched digest of cherry-picked cases at best, or at worst, the exploitation and sensationalization of the missing and dead, most of whom are children. I'll let you make your own judgments, and I will spare you any further preaching. Instead, I wish you a wonderful day, and I will see you again next time, whenever that happens to be, when we examine the next chapter of the book. Until then, take care.